It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. David Garley here today. We are going to be discussing sleep and rest and how we can use them as tools for more sustainable performance. So, I met David a while back through a mutual kind of connection of ours, and we've been collaborating on this topic, which is sleep is just one of my favorite topics to talk about. David is the director of the Better Sleep Clinic and works specifically with organizations, high performance athletes on this topic of improving sleep. David, did you want to kind of add to your introduction? Tell us a bit about the work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a doctor by background. So I used to work in respiratory medicine, so with lungs, which is actually where I first started working in sleep. So a lot of sleep disorders relate to how you breathe when you're asleep. And there's one in particular called obstructive sleep apnea. And this is one of these, it's a bit of an unusual condition, but it's basically where your upper airway repeatedly closes as you sleep. So you get this kind of loud snoring and really poor quality fragmented sleep. And it creeps in over decades sometimes. And you can be absolutely flat, falling asleep during the day. You can be, quite depressed with this, really quite poor physical state. But actually, diagnosis is quite straightforward, and then treatment in many cases is straightforward as well. And actually, when you restore someone to good quality sleep, sometimes it's as soon as 2 days later that you're looking at a completely different patient. So it really highlights the impact that sleep can have on your life. And I was just absolutely hooked on it. So I've since then I've actually moved to general practice and see a wider range of sleep disorders. And I've started the Better Sleep Clinic. So we see a lot of range of sleep disorders. We see patients on a one-to-one basis. But as you say, we also work with organizational clients, so workplaces is a big area that we work in, and high performance sports. But it's a fascinating area, sleep, and I'm really pleased to hear that you're on board with the enthusiasm as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Hannah. I'm the founder of I Am Pausing. And again, I work with organizations to help employees pause so that they can perform our best over the long term. And yeah, so today we've got about 25 minutes together, and so we're going to whiz through some topics. Please feel free to ask questions via the chat, and we'll have some time at the end for extra questions as well. But I kind of want to start on the topic of that's quite close to my heart as somebody who experienced multiple points over the 15-year kind of corporate career that I had before launching I Am Pausing. I experienced exhaustion and burnout sort of multiple times, and people that I speak to now, it's a recurring ongoing topic. David, what do you think is driving the exhaustion that so many of us feel at the moment?
It's a good question, and I think there's always several things. I think we live in a very busy culture. I think there's a lot of responsibility on a lot of people at the moment. So I think that's part of it, just the volume of work. But I also think that some of the steps have been taken recently, I think with hybrid working, and I think the developments that we have with digital technology means that work can be quite inescapable. That whereas back in the day you could leave your office, and in leaving your office you would leave a lot of your thoughts about work as well. They chase you around. Obviously, you've got my phone attached to them the whole time. So that persistent nature of the work as well, that means that you can struggle to find that rest that you so um, clearly need, I think, to keep on an even keel.
Yeah, it's always on, isn't it? This always on kind of culture. And when you work with people, what do you see as some of the biggest misconceptions around sleep?
I don't think people necessarily value it, which I think is interesting. I think when it's kind of drive with your work, and you just want to grind harder, that I don't think you necessarily see the value of sleep. And I think there can be good reasons for that. Sleep itself isn't what I would describe as a concrete concept. What is sleep? It's not really clear, is it? And so trying to see your need for sleep, I don't think is either clear in that way either. So I think that's part of it, that people don't necessarily value it. I also think that if it's seen in a kind of a one-dimensional way as just rest, I think that some people think that you need to rest more. That means that you're weaker. And I think that that there's kind of an egotistical side, I think, to work, that people don't want to look that way. So they don't there's, a 5 a.m. club would be a really good example, that people want to show how hard they grind by wearing their lack of sleep as a badge. And again, these things are complicated and can sometimes understand why people do that. But the role of sleep is really in supporting sustainable high performance. So viewing it really in the same way that a Formula One driver would see a pit stop, that you need to do these things to carry on going. And that it really is necessary. And I think gradually people's views on this are changing. I think people are starting to understand that they need sleep. They're seeing what happens if you don't sleep, that people are burning out. So I think things are gradually going in the right direction.
Oh, totally. We do unfortunately live in a bit of a hustle culture where it is like, how are you doing? Oh, I'm so busy, and that's just becomes a bit of a default response. And this was me for many years as well. And I do think things are changing though. And I personally was one of these high achieving, high performers who would probably have, yeah, was struggling with my sleep. My issue was that I would wake up at 3 a.m. and not be able to get back to sleep. Um, and so, and then now thinking about that and thinking about rest, I didn't know how to rest. So I was just kind of going straight to bed, falling asleep immediately because I was absolutely exhausted. But then waking up and my brain was kind of really active. And so, and this is something that I hear quite a lot as well. For someone in that situation, how would you work with them? What would you advise?
Yeah, good question. So I think if you're very stressed, it naturally disrupts your sleep. And that's a lot of that's actually how we're hardwired. And that comes back to how vulnerable we are when we sleep. So if you think about humans as we sleep, that we could be lay on the floor, eyes shut, not paying any attention for what could be 10 hours. So from an evolutionary point of view, any predator could come up and eat you. It'd be very easy to do. So the way that you offset that risk is in the pre-sleep period. If you perceive any stress, any threat, any worry, your body's response is to stay awake. And so when you feel that stress, your body stops sleeping. You have a threshold called an insomnia threshold. It's different for everyone, but if you get someone stressed enough, they will just stop sleeping. And that's absolutely how we're hardwired. So I think a lot of what we do in helping people get their sleep back on track is actually educational. Really, that's the mainstay of what we would call therapy, I suppose. But it's really helping people understand that. And it's not, your body's not broken when it happens. It's just stressed. And so there's kind of a pincer movement that you can do with stress, that you can try to reduce the amount of stress that you're experiencing. And there's ways that you can restructure your day, restructure the way that you work, get help where you need it. So reducing the stress, but also just managing better with the stress that you inevitably are going to feel. So it's just part of being human that you will feel stress, but there's good ways of coping and less good ways of coping. So trying to discourage things like, drinking alcohol can give you that kind of short-term benefit. That's a good example of a less good way to cope. That tends to disrupt sleep. It can make you feel a bit more on edge the next day. It can affect your mood if you're drinking a lot over a longer period of time. But things like exercise, journaling, dealing with stress in a much healthier way, trying to bring that stress level down. And then there's other ways that we actually look at just trying to improve sleep, looking at how your thoughts and your actions relate to sleep. And that comes back to something called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which you can adapt to various sleep issues. But that, in a kind of a broad brushstroke way, is how we would look at that. And I imagine that's quite similar to how you approach stress with your other work. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say a lot of the work that we do is educating on the nervous system and how pausing, so we have a framework for pausing, which is to feel good, to perform at our best, we need to pause. And there are three ways to pause. So mini pauses we need, and you just mentioned journaling, for example. That's a really nice way to have a mini pause in your day. It could just be 5, 10 minutes. Other types of mini pauses could be a short walk around the block or in some local park without your phone, um, or sitting down, having a cup of tea mindfully, doing a breath work exercise. The list goes on. But these short pauses, this intentional rest that we can take during the day, and there are actually 7 types of rest. This is not the topic of today's webinar, but this is something that we do educate on. So making sure you're getting all the right types of rest as well. In these mini pauses, medium pauses, same thing, but more like 45 minutes or an hour long. So for some, it could be a run, a game of tennis, a puzzle, a coloring book, whatever. And then immersive pauses. So making sure that a couple of times a year we are stepping fully back. In a corporate setting, this could be an off-site day or a leadership retreat. In a personal setting, it could be a family holiday or, attending a yoga retreat yourself. So making sure that you have this framework for pausing in your days via mini pauses, in your weeks via medium pauses, and in your year via these immersive pauses is going to ensure that your cup is full, your nervous system stays regulated, and you can perform at your best. So yeah, I guess, and so I talk a lot about pausing as a way to restore the nervous system, but of course, like sleep does that as well. How do you think about sleep and overall well-being? Yeah.
Yeah, we really have to do is think back to the last time you didn't sleep well. And in fact, that's how a lot of the research on sleep actually gets carried out. So sleep is actually quite difficult to research, partly because when someone is asleep, they're unconscious, so you can't really ask them. So what you tend to do is do all of this research from half a step back. So you look at large groups of people who don't sleep well and see what happens to them. But you can do your own study with yourself. If you think back to, I'm sure sometime in the last 2 weeks, especially with all this hot weather, there's probably been a night when you haven't slept very well. And how do you feel in the morning? That you feel physically fatigued, you can feel like a zombie, you can concentrate, struggle to remember, and be irritable. And that could be after one night of average sleep, below average sleep. But actually, if you were to have that for a week or a month or a year, that impact on your health, your physical health, and your mental health, and your general well-being is actually quite sinister. And you get this quite a strong link actually between sleep and mental health.
Mm.
That while we've known for a long time that conditions like anxiety and depression can impair your sleep. So if you're very anxious, it can be quite difficult to fall asleep. If you're depressed, sometimes you get early morning wakening, not all the time, but quite often. So we've known that for years, but actually it works the other way as well. And actually poor sleep will cause anxiety and cause depression. And the significance of that is if you've got a system where poor sleep is both the cause and an effect of a mental health condition that can feed into itself, and you get these rapidly escalating cycles. So you really can't separate sleep
Mm.
from well-being. It's just not really possible. Same with all the kind of the fundamental pillars of well-being. So movement, nutrition, things like that. You can't really separate it. So no,
Mm.
it's absolutely closely linked.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you mentioned the heat. I mean, I didn't sleep too well last night, but that is because it was very hot in my bedroom, but also I had a couple of glasses of wine, which, I knew was going to disrupt my sleep. However, trying to be a bit more balanced, because I personally, I have this aura ring and I'm tracking all my metrics and I can be a bit all or nothing and then often get a bit obsessed, with my sleep and it almost makes
Usually
it
does.
worse.
Yeah.
So I, try and kind of tune in and be like, you know what? I want to celebrate my friend's birthday. I'm going to allow myself to have some wine. That may mean that I might be a little foggy today, but and just having a bit more of a balanced view of it. And I don't know, do you see that a lot with people that you work with too?
Yeah, you can definitely become too focused on sleep, and sleep's a bit of a funny one that you fundamentally cannot approach sleep in the same way as you might approach things like training or nutrition. For nutrition you might calorie count, and that might put you in a very good position. But actually, if you become too focused on sleep, you tend to not sleep very well. That's a known thing, and I think that's the trap you can sometimes fall into with a lot of the wearable technology. Is that it kind of encourages you to look at your sleep through a magnifying glass with a fine tooth comb, and that can actually quite consistently cause a problem with your sleep. But no, you're right. If you want to celebrate and you drink, have a drink. There is sleep isn't the only thing in life. And we are, as a species, built to be resilient. So you're absolutely right that alcohol tends to disrupt sleep a bit, but we can cope with a night or two of poor sleep. And we had this conversation at Christmas because there's often a lot of people who are quite worried about how they're going to sleep at Christmas with all the frivolity and merrymaking and alcohol. But actually, like, how important is it? It's like you do need to sleep, but you've got to tread that path of not perhaps being too focused on it. And there are some times, and recently with a lot of the so Glastonbury Festival was another conversation that we had about how important is sleep at a festival. You think, well, you need to sleep a bit, and you will feel a bit ratty if you don't sleep, but at the same time, sleep isn't everything. So it's just all in balance.
Yeah, I feel that. I managed to get a good 5 hours of sleep most nights that I was at Glastonbury this year. However,
Oh, because you went, yeah,
that is a lot less than I normally get. But I also, yeah,
yeah,
like you said, it's like I'm not there. I wasn't exactly there to sleep, and I've been catching
exactly.
up since. But I'd love to know what kind of a topical one, right? We're in the middle of a bit of a heat wave now. Lots of my conversations this morning on my morning meetings with people saying, "Oh, I just couldn't sleep last night. It was too hot." What do you advise? Like, why do we find it hard to sleep in the heat, and what can we do about it?
Good question. So it's always difficult to sleep when it's hot, and part of the reason for that is actually when you move from the wake phase to the sleep phase of your circadian rhythm, it's associated with a drop in your core body temperature of about a half to 1.5 degrees. So this is why, when it's cold in winter, you think it's a bit uncomfortable, but if you lie in the same part of your bed and don't move, you'll heat that bit up and you'll fall asleep eventually. That's most people's experience. But actually, in summer, you can forget it. No one can sleep because you can't. You make it's difficult to make that transition into sleep. So what can you do about it? So firstly, just anticipate it happening. So I believe this weekend it's meant to get very hot again. So just accept that your sleep is going to be a bit disrupted, and when you anticipate it, it actually causes less of a problem. Ultimately, what you want to do is cool down, but do it on two fronts. So you want to try and cool your house down. You can do that through early in the day, drawing curtains on the side of your house or flat that gets the sun, and that actually makes a really big difference. So just not letting that greenhouse effect take place. You can cool your room down by getting a fan. If you've got aircon, we don't need to be having this conversation because you'll be absolutely fine. But if you don't have that, which is most people, then sticking a fan on and just getting air circulation through the room. And actually, you don't want it pointing directly on you because you probably get a bit too chilled, but just getting circulation into the room. Um, Most years you'll see something online that will say put a wet towel over a fan, but definitely advise against that unless you particularly want an electric shock. So don't take too much fan advice online. So try to cool down. You can do things like your bedclothes. So just taking the duvet lining out of the duvet out of the duvet lining, because actually sleeping without anything is it feels a bit unusual. So you want that familiarity. So you can get that with the duvet cover, but you can take the duvet innards out and just layers. So that really helps. And that if you are getting a bit too warm, that you can take a layer off or put a layer on. So you can definitely do that. But the other way that you should try and cool down is mentally. So don't get too worked up about the fact that you can't sleep. If you run into this expecting to have normal sleep, you probably aren't going to get that, and you probably are going to get quite frustrated. And that frustration works in the same way as I said earlier about evolutionary stress. If you're stressed, you can't sleep. So if you get very frustrated about the fact that you can't sleep because it's hot, that independently is actually going to stop you from sleeping. So push your bedtime a bit later is good advice. So when you're getting into bed later, you have that increased drive for sleep. So you have an increased drive, so you're more likely to fall asleep quicker and stay asleep, and it'll also probably be cooler then. So don't expect perfect sleep. Push your bedtime a bit later and try not to worry too much because at the end of the day, we are resilient creatures and we are built to manage even with a bit of poor sleep.
It's really good advice, isn't it? Because sometimes I can be like, oh, better get into bed early because probably won't have a good night's sleep. And then you're just tossing and turning and getting more and more
Exactly.
angry.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Um, and so I would love to know, we've got a question in here from Amber around tips on what somebody should and shouldn't do if they are struggling to sleep. I guess more practical tips.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you do? So sometimes, and I think you just described doing this actually, Hannah, is actually if you're struggling to fall asleep, sometimes you get into bed a little bit early, and absolutely understand why. Because if you think, oh, I need 7 hours, or how many hours you need, if I need to get that, I need to be up at 7 a.m. and it takes me 2 hours to fall asleep every night, then I need to get into bed 2 hours early. But that usually makes the problem worse actually, because if you're spending longer in bed, you can imagine if that's your sleep need, if you pull that to here, it tends to fragment. So the pattern is you take a long time to fall asleep, and then when you fall asleep, you wake up a lot in the night. So actually, what you want to do is push that together. So you've got that increased sleep drive that I mentioned earlier that you can do if it's very warm. So you get an increased drive for sleep. You fall asleep quicker, and you tend to stay asleep. And you might find that when you wake up, that overall that probably is a bit short time. So you might find that you do have an increased sort of feeling of sleep deprivation during the day, but over time you'll find that you start to sleep in a consolidated block, and you're kind of relearning how to sleep. And what you can do then is just work your bedtime back a little bit, so you're getting more hours. So that's good advice. And the second big thing I would say is that if you're in bed and you can't fall asleep within 15 to 20 minutes. It's deliberately vague, so it's not about clock watching or counting or anything like that. But if roughly that amount of time has gone past and you're not asleep, you should give yourself a break and get out of bed. So if you stay in bed, two things will happen. Number one, you'll get annoyed because lying in bed and not being able to sleep is one of the most annoying things in the world. So don't let that happen, especially when the room is dark. There's no one else there to distract you, and you just get your thoughts just get pulled down this kind of vortex of negative thinking, and you've got nothing to stop that. So don't let that happen because if you get annoyed, that independently will stop you from sleeping. So get out of bed. And the second thing that will happen if you stay in bed is that your mind just gets used to viewing the bed as a place for wake. Whereas
Mm.
what we need it to mean is sleep, because this is actually one of the ways that sleep is triggered. It's through that very strong association of the bed meaning sleep. So, if you spend long periods of time awake in bed, that is what the bed comes to mean, and which is why a lot of people who have insomnia, they'll tell you that I fall asleep in front of the TV without any particular issue, but as soon as I get into bed, something happens. I can't stop thinking. I can't stop worrying. I absolutely can't sleep because that's what the bed means. So don't let that happen. Get out of bed, and you want to find what we would call a relaxing and distracting activity while you wait for that urge to sleep to come back. So reading's quite good if you like reading. So reading's good because it's in that sweet spot. So it's not too boring that your mind wanders and you worry about your deadlines or your daughter is at university or whatever it is that's on your mind. So you don't want it too boring, but you also don't want to be doing Sudoku or crosswords or answering emails because that just engages your brain. So something in that sweet spot. So reading's good. What do other people do? Coloring, puzzles, jigsaw puzzles, listening to podcasts, just things that you enjoy doing, and do that while you wait for the urge to sleep to come back. So these urges to sleep, they're often quite wave-like. So you might miss the first one, and that's absolutely fine. But don't get too wound up while you're waiting for the second one.
Mm.
So do reading or whatever you want to do. And then when you feel that urge to sleep, just go back to bed, turn off the light, and intend to sleep. And over time, you find that hopefully things gets your sleep back on track.
But yeah, that's a really good one. Something else that I have found helpful, and again, maybe if you are a person that enjoys yoga, meditation, these sorts of things, if I can't sleep, I will lay on my bedroom floor and put my feet up against the wall. My legs, sorry, not just my feet, but my legs, and then just put my hands on my belly and just breathe into my belly 4 or 5 times. And sometimes just doing that and like having the blood flow and the sort of getting into my body a little bit, that then if I get back into bed, I can sleep. Um, and another one is if you do have like headphones or especially if you're sleeping with someone else in the bed, is a recorded like meditation or even a sleep story, like you said. those can really help. And if I've had a really bad night's sleep, so actually like last night, I know this afternoon I'm going to take 15 minutes. I'm going to lie on the sofa probably, and I'm going to do a non-sleep deep rest practice. So these, Andrew Huberman has loads on his YouTube channel, and you just press play and it's just a script, protocol, body scan, meditation. I mean, it is yoga nidra really is the practice that he's using there. And that, according to his research, 10 to 15 minutes of that practice is the equivalent of 2 to 3 hours of restorative sleep. I don't know if you've kind of agree with that science or not, but that is what I read
Yeah.
from him.
Yeah, there's certainly value in waking rest. I don't know what the exchange rate is between
Yeah.
various forms of waking rest. Human's a bit of a mixed bag, but some of the stuff he comes out with is certainly useful. I say in broad terms that um, wakeful rest is valuable in the same way that sleep is valuable. One thing I've always struggled with. So I don't know. Do you nap? I'm a massive napper, but do you think you do what happens if you fall asleep? Do you ever fall asleep during the episodes of wakeful rest?
Not normally. I normally find myself in this liminal zone, which is sort of in between. I feel like yeah, I'm not fully asleep, but I'm not fully awake.
Yeah, no, so I like mindfulness meditation, but I have to pick the right kind of sort of time of the day to do it because I'm prone to falling asleep. And actually sleep fine at night. Like I'm a good sleeper, but I'm also a good napper, too good a napper. So
Maybe there's a
yeah, it's hard to
correlation
tell.
there, you know.
Maybe, yeah.
So yeah, no, I don't nap that easily. So that's why those are really good for me because it's helpful to switch off. Um, we have got just a couple of minutes left, and we do have another question, which is there a threshold of, that they've said, I know people's sleep needs vary, but is there a threshold of too much sleep?
Yeah, so you can have too much sleep. Um, you can have too much sleep, and there's different ways that can kind of manifest. I mean, some people will you can't sleep more than you need to in is one way of looking at it. Um, but it's I suppose that what it comes back to is the quality of sleep. So sleep isn't just a quantity; it's a quality as well. And you might know that sleep isn't a single state. There's broadly two states. So one is associated with these brisk fluttering eye movements. That's called REM, rapid eye movement. And then the other half doesn't have these movements. That's non-REM, non-rapid eye movement. Non-REM is further subdivided into three. So you've got non-REM one, which is really light sleep, which is what you do during Netflix if it's not very interesting. And then you have non-REM two, which is just a little bit deeper. It's still considered light sleep actually, but a little bit deeper. Then you have non-REM three, which is your really deep restorative sleep that you need to get to feel properly refreshed in the morning. And actually, you don't have them as sort of separate blocks. You move through these stages in a cycle. So you fall asleep into non-REM one, go deeper. Then about 30, 40 minutes in, you'll have your first bit of non-REM three, which you have for a period of time. Then you work your way out towards the surface. You have an episode of REM, so the vivid dreaming sleep. And that's the sleep cycle. Average time is about 90 minutes. Um, so these are the stages of sleep. So if you stretch your sleep window out too long, you tend to flutter in and out of these very light stages of sleep. Easy to wake someone up, not feeling very satisfying. Whereas if you push it together, you tend to drop into deeper states of sleep. And this is why, if you have friends or anyone you know who's got young kids, that they'll wonder how they're alive because they're only getting 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night. But the reason is that their quality of sleep is very good. So the quality of sleep of someone coming back from Glastonbury Festival would probably be very good. So you can get poor, unsatisfying sleep that also takes up a lot of your day. So you can overdo it. You absolutely can. But there are some disorders where you sleep too much as well. So these are called hypersomnias. But yeah, yeah, you can. And actually, sometimes there's a famous there's a tennis player who actually used to sleep. He used to sleep something like 16 hours. It was something ridiculous. And then he had kids and couldn't sleep that much, and actually found the sweet spot that was something more conventional. That actually he found for years that because his social arrangement allowed him to sleep for a long time, he did. But actually, when he pushed that sleep window closer together, he actually slept better.
Mm, that makes sense to me. Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting to think about the quality, not just the quantity of
Yeah.
your sleep. Um, yeah, super fascinating. Um, Great. And then I guess in terms of final thoughts, what do you think, we're talking about um, sustainability, productivity in a workplace setting. What do you think would change if we, prioritize sleep and rest, um, like we maybe do some other sort of leisure activities? What do you think what would happen to our performance?
Well, so the impact of poor sleep on the workplace can affect employees. So it impacts your physical and mental health, your general well-being. From an employer level, it increases your rates of absenteeism quite significantly. So there's a study across Europe that showed you actually get 14 additional days of off sick if you have insomnia. So that's in addition to the other days that you'd be having sick. So that's a huge amount. There's also presenteeism, so turning up to work and not really working as well as you could, either in terms of output or innovation. So there's presenteeism. There's also accident risk. So you're at much higher risk of an accident if you aren't sleeping well. And these aren't just small accidents. These are, big accidents with, significant disability and big payouts. And burnout and staff turnover. So these are really core areas, core metrics that people are interested in. So if you can fix sleep, you fix all these areas. So you find that your workers are happier and healthier. They're turning up more, literally, because they're not having days off sick. They're not having as many accidents, and they're staying in your workplace. So they're not turning over. They're not leaving. Particularly if you work in an industry that struggles to recruit, takes a long time training. It's an absolute nightmare if your staff are leaving. And actually, the points at which we often get brought in is if there's been an audit, either of accident risk, absenteeism, or turnover. And sleep is often quoted. So sleep is one of these things that does fly under the radar until you bother to look for it.
Mm,
And part of that is because if you haven't slept well, you probably wouldn't say that to your boss. If you can't come in because you haven't slept well, you'd normally say, "It's my back, I've got the flu," or something else. So it gets dressed up as something else because it is a slightly stigmatized condition. So so whatever the sleep, whatever your workplace is, the sleep issue is probably bigger than you think it is, but it's being dressed up as something else. So actually, if you can fix sleep in your workplace, you fix all these key areas.
mm. Yeah, it's just fascinating. I just thank you so much, David. We have run out of time. I could keep talking about this for the rest of the day, but yeah, just to recap, we've run through the impact of sleep on the workplace, on us as individuals, on what we can do to sleep better in the heat, how, not just the length of sleep is important, but also the quality, as well as much, much more. So yeah, where is so we run sessions together, David and I, for workplaces on these topics. So please do get in touch if you would like to know more. And where can people kind of connect with you or learn more about your work, David?
So you can look at what we do on our website. So that's thebettersleepclinic.co.uk. We're also on Instagram and LinkedIn. So yeah, come and find out more. And if there's something you want to know that you can't find, just drop us an email.
Amazing. Great. Well, thank you so much, and we'll leave it there.